Hey folks, my name is Dave. Welcome to our shop here at NTD Racing, where I just recently put Langmuir Systems CrossFire XR together. But for the next few weeks, I still have my CrossFire Pro here until it goes to my buddy Dave Johnson's house. And so let's do a side-by-side comparison and see what you get. A little bit of business first. If you like what you see here, please reach down, hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a comment. That sure helps us out. Also, if you're interested in one of these tables, there is a link in my description below. There's also a link if you go to our website at www.ntdracing.com. And that's gonna get you about $100 off on the CrossFire Pro. And in the future, it's also gonna get you a discount on the CrossFire XR. Let's go ahead, walk around the tables and see what you get with both tables and the advantage of having one over the other. Let's put them to work and see how they do on making the same cut. Let's start this thing off just by talking about the basic structure of the table. The way that the CrossFire Pro is constructed is it basically has 2-inch by 2-inch square tubes making up the majority of all of the structure and also the gantry. I checked it out. I would say it's about 14 gauge steel for that. And it does have some gussing in there to rigid everything up. Now, I did put some wheels on the bottom so I could move my table around, and I might do the same with the CrossFire XR. I just need to take a little while to design that. However, as far as dimensions go of the entire table, it sits out from the wall that you see here by about 53 inches. Its total width is about 64 inches wide, and since it has its the cabling all going through this little riser here, it's up to 80 inches high, so you need to account for that inside of your shop. The cutting table on the CrossFire Pro is 33 inches long by 48 inches wide. It takes about 12 gallons of water in there, and I've put about a half sheet, about a 4x4 of 1/4 inch plate on here. I've also put almost a full sheet of 3/16 plate. And that comes out to about 270 pounds of material and water that I've had on this water table. So it will take some weight on the table. I think it would probably take a little bit more. I think the casters that I have on there limit that just a little bit. I think if I just had it resting right on the floor like they do in the normal design, it might take a little bit more weight, a little more confidently. All right, let's contrast that with this behemoth, which is the CrossFire XR, or at least relative behemoth. When you think of the structure of this, I almost think of like a structural steel building. Look at just how wide and thick the members are here. They use this bent sheet metal in here, really able to resist a lot of shear in the right directions, making this a super strong table. How strong? We'll just contrast it with the other table. It says they'll take about 65 gallons of water in the water table. You see I'm filling it up right now. And also a 1-inch thick plate steel at 4 by 8 feet. That brings you to about 1,850 pounds of metal, and that is a behemoth inside this 4 by 8 cutting surface. It sits back from the wall about 61 inches, and it's 109 inches from this side all the way to the end. That does not include this computer over here. The computer hangs off the end, and I'm going to move it just because it just doesn't fit with my shop, and it's going to be easy to remove a couple bolts. But if you leave this thing on here, it brings the dimensions of the table to 133 inches wide, and it sits back from my wall by about 79 inches. Let's go ahead and talk about water tables. The water table on the CrossFire Pro, I like it. I think it works really good. It is a stainless steel water table. You can see that it is a smaller gauge metal. I can move it and flex it, but you just don't usually put weight on that part of the water table. It holds water and it does its job well. One of the things I do like about the water table on the CrossFire Pro, better than the XR, is that these racks are a little bit smaller, and I find that it's easier to clean and get a vacuum in here to clean out the inside of my table. So that is nice. One other thing is when you go to load metal onto your CrossFire Pro, it goes in this direction, and it can be 48 inches wide, and you feed it in this direction, and it can go out the back, so it can be longer than 33 inches. And if you watch my video where I do an index cut, I put almost a full sheet of metal through my CrossFire Pro. We'll go ahead and contrast that over here again with the CrossFire XR, and just look at the much more rigid water table. And you can see that it looks like about 1-inch square tube is what they trim the entire corner all the way around the water table with. So you could actually run pieces of metal, slide them up over and onto that table, which you really couldn't do on the Pro. Another thing that you can do is you can take the gantry and move it all the way to the extreme over here to where it completely will expose the table, so it's not even covering the end of the table. And that way now you could actually load metal from this side, you could load metal from this side, and you could also load from that way. And another thing is if you are into large production and you're going to try to load one of those 1-inch thick pieces of plate steel, you're not doing that with a couple dudes. That's 1,500 pounds of steel. You're doing that with probably a forklift, and you could actually bring a forklift in and drop it right on the side once you move the gantry all the way back. So again, another really nice feature of really having this production level CrossFire XR in your shop. And one last thing to talk about with the water table is it has two drains on it. It has a drain right over here and a drain all the way over back here in the corner. Unfortunately, it has 4 sections, and those sections are separated by a vertical rib, which is probably about, you know, half of an inch high when you assemble it. There's that rib in there. And so the water that is in that section can't flow over that rib over here to this section. So as you drain the table, these 2 center sections will still be full. And that could be a problem for some people. I actually like when you drain the table to have a little bit of water left in there, because as you vacuum, it sucks up all the other stuff. The water helps pull that up. What I'm going to do in my next video, and you'll see, is I'm going to put a drain in each one of the tables, and I'll be happy to show you how I do that at a reasonable cost. All right, let's compare the motion of the 2 plasma tables. The Y-axis and the X-axis and the Z-axis all kind of operate on these small bearings here, and they work fine. I have seen some people maybe over tighten those, ran them over some dirty gantries, and ended up having failures of these bearings, but they're going to be pretty easy to replace. They look like pretty common bearings. You can see that this bearing is actually touching, and this one on my table isn't even touching, but it still makes good cuts. Don't change anything if it's working well. Anyway, as far as the motion goes, it's also a bit exposed out there. So all these parts are exposed. So as this thing is firing the plasma torch, water's flying all over the place. And you can see it gets the guide rails inside. They're all over the place, a little bit dirty. You can go in there with some WD-40 and a brass brush and clean that up pretty nicely. I clean these rails up right here all the time. I try to keep them clean with some WD-40, and I just use some gear oil on the lead screws. Let's go ahead and compare the motion of this to the motion on the CrossFire XR. Here's the cool thing about the XR is they covered everything up, because these tables do splash up some water. And so your entire X-axis is totally covered up. Your Z-axis is hidden behind the gantry, and your Y1, Y2 axes are hidden totally underneath all this other stuff over here, including the rails are hidden underneath the side of the water table. So really did some good thinking about how everything is covered up. This cover right here covers up the rollers for the Y1 and the Y2 side over here. Let's go ahead and pull off this cover on the X-axis and see what you get. Okay, so here is a look at the Z-axis, and as you can see, it's just a little bit different than the CrossFire Pros in that it's just a little bit more robust, but all of the functionality of this works exactly the same as the functionality on the CrossFire Pro. When you start to cut, the thing's going to plunge down, touch the metal, it's going to hit your initial height sensing, figure out how high it is, it's going to climb up to initially fire the torch. Once it fires the torch, it's going to drop down to your cut height and then continue cutting exactly the same way that the CrossFire Pro does. And this one is nice in that it is a lot more protected, and so it'll be easier to keep it neat and also allow you to make much longer production runs. The rollers that roll on the rail for the Y-axis are also much more robust, and I'll show you a picture of those without this cover on, which protects them from any kind of debris. Continuing on with the motion for the tables, on the CrossFire Pro, what you have is stepper motors, and the stepper motors turn these lead screws. These lead screws in turn step through these nuts right here, which are connected to the Y or the X axis, and then move the gantry back and forth, or move the Z axis back and forth across the X axis. We have the same kind of stepper motors on the CrossFire XR. It goes through this belt drive down to what's called a ball nut. Now, as opposed to on the CrossFire Pro where that nut was fixed, on the CrossFire XR, the ball nut is actually spinning, and what's called the ball screw is fixed. It does not move. And the benefit of that is now you can have a much longer run of a ball screw, and you're not going to get the problem with that screw whipping as you're starting to spin that thing really fast. Let's say, for example, this thing is capable of moving at 400 inches per minute. And on tables where you have a lead screw, that screw will start to whip because it's turning so fast, and you're not going to have that problem with the ball nut ball screw setup. The control boxes on both of the tables are really nearly identical. You have all the channels going to your stepper motors and then also to your torch height control. The few differences on the control box for the XR is obviously the connectors are a little bit different. There is a lead added in for the status lights on the Z axis, and then also over here you get another lead for the limit switches on the table. So what are the limit switches all about? There are 3 limit switches that are on the CrossFire XR. You have your first one over here on the X axis, and when you do a homing run on the fire control, which I'll show you here in a second, it's going to run the X axis all the way over, and it's going to go ahead and touch this, and that's going to tell it where it is in relation on the table and let it zero itself out. Likewise, on the Y1 and Y2 axis down here, there's a limit switch on both sides. And what happens is when you run your homing function, those limit switches run all the way down here to the end until they hit this screw right here. And when it hits that, it zeroes out each side individually and completely re-squares that gantry. So this will be the most controversial part of this whole video, is which plasma cutter I am using. I'm using the Razor Weld Cut 45 for both tables. I keep saying as soon as my razor weld dies, I'm buying a Hypertherm, but these things keep cutting, and the cut quality I think is outstanding. To start with, the torch height control boxes that you get with both tables are exactly the same. So that system works well, and I didn't try to change anything with the working system. The black one over here is my old razor weld. And there were a few issues in bulletins that they sent out where you needed to maybe change your resistor in this one and maybe adjust how much you tighten down the shield on the nozzle for your plasma cutting tip. But besides that, when they went over here to this new one with the new color, they changed those things. So all those things that were issues with the old plasma cutter are fixed in this new plasma cutter. And so far, my first cuts have been absolutely perfect with no issues. So I only expect for this thing to continue cutting the same way. A really quick note about how I run these things. Normally what I'm cutting is 1/8 inch through 1/4 inch plate steel. So I send my full pressure shop air into this thing. It regulates the pressure itself. And I normally will run it all the way to its maximum cutting capacity at 45 amps. And then I adjust the speed. If I'm cutting 1/8 inch steel or 11 gauge, I'm cutting about 65 to 70 inches per minute. 50 for 3/16 and about 25 if I'm cutting 1/4 inch. I could probably speed it up a little bit considering the drops I get sometimes, but I just use those speeds and the thing's been cutting great for my uses. So let's talk about how you interface with the two tables. If you're using the CrossFire Pro, you need your own computer, and that's connected through a USB to the control box, and it has all the functionality you would need to make cuts and jog the table around and do those kinds of things. Let's compare that to the CrossFire XR, where they actually give you an additional touchscreen. Why do I like this so much? Well, one is it's a bigger touchscreen. It's dedicated to the table. It works really well. But what I really like is that when I'm working on my laptop, I'm usually doing that in my upstairs office as I'm doing all my CAD and those kinds of things. And now I can save things onto the cloud. I can come down here to this dedicated computer, and if you look over here on the back, it actually has its own little tiny miniature PC on the back, which is running this touch screen, and it works just like a normal computer. I can log in from at that point to that shared folder I have, pull up the work that I need to do, and then cut it down here without having to drag my laptop down the stairs and chance dropping it or something like that. So it's dedicated, it's down here, and I find that it works really nice. All right, let's go ahead and get some water into the tables and do the same cut. Well, I usually try to capture all of the CAD at the end of my videos so that you can just, if somebody's interested in watching CAD, they can click there, but I forgot to add the audio on this one. So no CAD at the end, this is all you get, and I'll get you on the next one. So here's something that I'm totally in love with in this new table, and it's this pennant they provide you with. And here's what's really cool about it is usually I will find myself working on these things we call the skeletons, which is just a piece of metal that just has a whole bunch of pieces cut out. So you have little places where you can cut stuff out. And now you got to basically bring your X and Y axis over and zero it out on something. And so now what you can do is right on the pennant, you can move this thing and even lower the Z axis down to make sure that you're getting right to the corner of this thing for when you want to zero out the axis. I think it's super cool and saves a lot of time. Now let's make the same cut with the CrossFire Pro. All right, let's go ahead and take an honest look at both of the cuts. This is the one from the CrossFire XR. I think it did a really nice job. There's a little bit of an entry mark right there that needs to be kind of ground down a little bit. The lines are tight. The turns look really nice and clean, so I think that looks pretty good. A little bit dross on the back side, and I think I could pick up the speed a little bit on that cut, and it might maybe get rid of some of that dross. Looking at the CrossFire Pro, again, a little bit messier metal. I think the consumables on this one are a little bit older, but I am using that Harbor Freight dryer. You can see my video where in my playlist where I put that Harbor Freight dryer to use. I think it works really well. I think my consumables last literally 5 times longer with the dryer on there. But it did pretty good. What's really neat is when you stack the two on top of each other and see that they are dimensionally exactly the same. They're absolutely perfect. I think they did really good. And I think it's kind of neat in that, you know, these are the same code running on 2 different tables, different weights of gantries, a light gantry, a heavy gantry, and they both look exactly the same. So spot on both of these. If you've been watching my channel, you know that I like to be upfront about what it's really going to cost you to have these things in your shop. So here you go. To have a CrossFire Pro sitting in your shop, $4,200, and an XR sitting in your shop about $8,200. So, you know, about double for all that capability the XR is going to give you. But I don't think this isn't really the contrast you should make is between the two of these. Is for both of these, you get the entire plasma cutting system with the torch I control, the water table, you get the plasma cutter, you get the shipping and the taxes. This is the price to have this thing in your garage. And at $8,200, it is still half of the starting price of other comparable tables out there that haven't added in shipping and torches and all those kinds of things. You can't beat the price that you're getting from Langmuir Systems. Well, all right. Well, I think that the cut quality that you see from those just kind of shows you that you are not going to pick one table over the other to get cut quality. What it really comes down to for you is what do you need in your shop? How much space do you have? What kind of production rate do you need? What durability do you need out of a table? For me, I built the entire Honcho, our desert race truck, on the CrossFire Pro, and it worked perfectly. Even when I needed to make a cut greater than 33 inches long, I have a video out there you can check out for index cutting with the CrossFire Pro, and it worked great. And those trailing arms are going on to their 3rd off-road desert race, so it works. If you're into more production, you need more capacity, something that's going to maybe, you know, run longer before you need to clean it up and those kinds of things, then the XR might be for you. Just depends. And also, what's your budget? So you need to kind of consider those things. To help you out with that a little bit, again, if you go to www.ntdracing.com, there is a link in there. I'm an affiliate with them, and that'll get you about $100 off on the CrossFire Pro. And in the future, it's also going to get you a discount on the XR. Again, I hope you like what you saw here today, and you'll consider hitting that like and subscribe, maybe leaving a comment. I'll try to answer all those either in the comments or on my next video. And until then, I'll see you next week. Take care of yourself.